I really feel at home here. So yes, I am a Newfoundlander, and all the people I have met who have come here for X reason, studies, work, they also feel like Newfoundlanders now. It is true. We feel at home.
When I was a kid, like a little kid, probably at most 5 or 6 years old, and my brother he's a year younger than me, he was also involved in this. My dad had the Are You a Newfoundlander test. I remember it because I passed it. I think my brother passed it 100% of the time, but it was simple. Basically, all you had to do, stand up straight, put your arms down by your sides and make a fist, and he'd come up behind you and take you by the fists and try to lift you off the ground. If you came off the ground, you were a Newfoundlander. I don't know if this was like my dad's own thing or if this is like a thing in Newfoundland that other people's dads used to do with them, but it was as simple as that. You come off the ground, you're a Newfoundlander. Now I make videos for YouTube, so in the comment section you see all kinds of things, and I don't let it bother me because I know what the YouTube comment section can look like. But I did make a video recently that some guy didn't like, and he filled up the comment feed with basically his rules and regulations for being a Newfoundlander. He talked about what any Newfoundlander should be offended by and when a Newfoundlander should be ashamed of themselves. He questioned my authenticity as a Newfoundlander because of the way I sound when I talk, my accent. I don't let comments in the YouTube comments section bother me, but I gotta admit it kind of bothered me with this stuff because even by his criteria, I am a 100% card-carrying member of the Newfoundlanders Club. I just found it kind of silly that some guy who I guess thinks he's the Pope of the Newfoundlanders dictates what it means to be a Newfoundlander. As you may or may not know if you watch the channel, I am an immigration consultant, so I've been focused on immigration in Newfoundland and the history of immigration in Newfoundland, and I've been reading a few books by a great Newfoundlander named Gerhard Bassler, who passed away earlier this year in March of 2023. He is a former professor at Memorial University who moved to Canada, to Newfoundland, in, I believe, in 1965, in the 60s, born in Germany, and he came to Newfoundland by way of, I believe, Kansas. He was in the United States for a little while before coming to Newfoundland. So he spent close to 60 years before passing away this year in Newfoundland. And I just called him a Newfoundlander a moment ago. That's because I assume, because of his great work that seemed like he was very passionate about this place, I assume he considered himself to be a Newfoundlander. And some of the things that come up in his work are questioning, what does it mean to be a Newfoundlander? Who can be a Newfoundlander? I really liked his work, and one of his books called Sanctuary Denied, he specifically touches on this concept, and he cites the Evening Telegram, now the Telegram in St. John's, cites an editorial and a response to the editorial from 1989, where the chief editor of the Evening Telegram, which, please understand, 1989 was not yesterday, but it is within my living memory, that in 1989 newspapers actually were behemoths in influence in the community. The Evening Telegram being the biggest newspaper in St. John's, it had a lot of influence over the way people thought. So in the editorial, the editor basically talks about a problem he has with the CBC for talking about native Newfoundlanders. And he has a problem with the CBC for basically considering people that don't fit his version of who a Newfoundlander can be. Now, just as a side note, I specifically want to thank Glenda Doff from the Center for Newfoundland Studies at Memorial University for helping me track down these articles, because I've been trying to track them down since reading that book from Gerhard Bassler a year or two ago, and she was able to find them at the Memorial University Library. So thank you, Glenda. Now, if I'm to disagree on a general level with the philosophy that you need to be born in Newfoundland to be considered a Newfoundlander, it's that I don't think it's a zero-sum game where if I'm born in Newfoundland and consider myself a Newfoundlander, for somebody to come from away to consider themselves a Newfoundlander, that somehow takes away from my worth as a Newfoundlander. I don't want to share my Newfoundlanderness with somebody who's not from Newfoundland. I think that's a childish mindset, but I think it's also been kind of ingrained in people, not just in Newfoundland, but in a lot of places where you are. You hear of native New Yorkers, and they specify they're a native New Yorker, but how many people live in New York City right now were not born there, and they can still consider themselves a New Yorker because they live there and they contribute to that city's identity. My operating ethos, and I used to actually mention this in my videos when I first started doing this, and I haven't really done it in a while, but the mantra, if you will, it is wherever you're from, wherever you're to, there's a place for you here. That too is a very Newfoundland nuance that some people may or may not get, but I digress. I still stand by that, and I think every piece of that is important, because it doesn't matter where you're from to me. It doesn't matter where you are to me. If you have ties to Newfoundland and Labrador and you care about it deeply, then you can be a Newfoundlander if you want. And I specify if you want, because that's important. Even if someone comes to Newfoundland and sets up a life, they may not consider themselves a Newfoundlander, and that's fair too. I lived in Alberta for 3 years, I lived in Ontario for 4 years, and I've lived in British Columbia for almost 20 years. But to this day, the only place that I call home is Newfoundland, and I still identify as a Newfoundlander, not an Albertan or an Ontarioian or whatever they're called. I guess the point here is that I agree that it is a term that can be honorable, and people can be proud to call themselves whatever they want to call themselves. I'm a proud Newfoundlander, 100%. The editor of the Telegram actually says in his piece something to the effect of, to the mainlanders and immigrants who have come to Newfoundland, I hope you're living well, I hope you're happy. But he also reminds them basically throughout the piece that you'll never be one of us. And that's the outdated way of thinking that I don't want to have anything to do with. If you feel for whatever reason that you need to clearly define the rules and regulations of who can be a Newfoundlander and who can't, do whatever you're going to do. You're not going to convince me. I'm not going to convince you with this video to change your ways either. We're just going to have to learn to live with each other. But my point is, to anybody who doesn't fit the narrow definitions that have been put out into the world through a powerful newspaper back in the day, or through YouTube comments that are public for anybody to see, just know that you are welcome to come to Newfoundland, to stay in Newfoundland, to set up a life in Newfoundland, and if you so wish, to call yourself a Newfoundlander.